rant before we get started today.
Okay. Let's see here. Boom, and we're live. Awesome. Here we go, guys. I'm going to just get this going. Thanks for joining us today again, gentlemen.
Such a pleasure. So happy to be
Yeah, it was
here.
awesome. Actually, go ahead. Sorry. I've got a voice lag, guys, so I'll be, it'll be awkward as usual with my system here.
I was just saying it's lovely to be here with three of my favorite gentlemen on the planet. I mean, how cool is that?
Honored, my brother.
Yeah.
Let me turn off my. Okay, there you go.
Here I go. I'm going to hit record.
I was had my sound going there, Mike.
Well, it wouldn't be AlphaCast without that to start. So
it wouldn't. It lends just a tremendous amount of authenticity, doesn't it?
Indeed. It wouldn't be radio hour without a little feedback.
Well, hey, we're here to talk about authenticity, so that's great. Start with the proper foundation.
It is the hard money of our currency is on the authenticity. Here we go. And boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm here as always with my fellow rebel with the cause, Dr. Bear Paul Lando. I could see probably back in the day, did you have the James Dean look, Bear? Rolled up sleeves?
Well, I didn't always have a cause. I was just a rebel and didn't know why the F I was pissed off about everything, but I'm starting to figure it out now.
It's good to have the cause behind the effects and know what that is. It's got a lovely spring day today. Blue skies on my side here. And God, the Smith River just has that glossy, perfect turquoise color right now. It is beyond gorgeous. I actually got on the river 2 days ago, Bear. I don't know, wanted a work break, took the dog down there, threw a line in and caught me a big old steelhead.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was, I put the video up on my Instagram story, super fun. I kind of caught the bug there for a second, forgot how fun that is. But just what an amazing place we get to live in. And
I was down the river a few weeks back during a big storm because it was messing with my water pump down the river there. And across the river, there was like this splashing that was so huge, I couldn't figure out what it was. It was like it had to have been bigger than, any salmon or steelhead on Earth. And I still don't know what it was. So I sat down there just staring for a while. And periodically, this thing would just start flopping around. I'm like, what do we have? Sea lions that have come up here or something? And it was huge. It was like crazy.
What was it?
River Bigfoot? I don't know. I've never seen anything like it.
The Smith River serpent? You never saw what it was? Wow, maybe it was a river otter. Maybe it was a river otter with a big fish. Who knows? Well, yeah, it's great to be back. Hey, I just freshened up my mouth with the new tooth scrub, which we're about to launch. Really loving this product. Excited that this is going to be dropping in our store soon. That'll round out our dental solutions product line, and it is quite tasty. I actually did the dip with the serum with the scrub today, and it is badass. So
it's great when you use both, isn't it? That's what I've been doing.
Yeah. So check that out, guys. It's a whitening tooth scrub product to replace your toothpaste. And then that coupled with the serum and the oil pulling product is just a triumvirate of dental wellness. So definitely keep an eye out
just
for that.
A couple words on that. I'm going to start going full Alex Jones here because,
you got the documents? Like, do you have the documents?
Yeah, like buy our shit and say, help us defeat the New World Order. Well, hey, we grow things, we make things. We don't just buy mass-produced stuff and throw some, a label on somebody else's crap. We have really amazing products, and the reason why we do it is to support our farm and our whole operation. That's just what we call full circle permaculture. So, I'm really calling for people to give our stuff a look. You won't find anything like it anywhere all custom hand, artisan made and everything with a lot of experience that goes into it, from our background in athletics and years of clinical bioterrain medicine. So they're really different. It's a cut above. And what we want to do at Alfa Vedic is develop a war chest to really start getting some amazing media out. We've been very privileged to be part of some good projects, like Andy and Marcy did an amazing job with the terrain movie, but there's still not enough good stuff out. And when you get out in the new conservative, kind of world that we fancy ourselves being in, well, it's still normie world. It's still about, buying, having access to horse dewormer to, ward off non-existent diseases. And, we just really need to start smartening up. And, before we got on, we are talking about chemtrails and stuff. That stuff's really starting to piss me off. And I have some back channels going back years, and I've just got some recent updates from the horse's mouth. This would be our head of Maha. And, his heart's in the right place. But he's also saying, well, there's nothing he can do about the airspaces. So let's focus on red dye number, whatever. Well, if effing people are still, just intending to do all their shopping down the Fruit Loop aisle, hey, let them have at it. That's their problem. You can get rid of all the red dyes and additives and everything all day long. Yeah, it's great. It's good talking points. But as long as they're spraying us from the skies, it's game over. We notice the effects in our farm. We, get reports from people all over the world that are sick all the time now. We take measurements. We know what's coming down on us. So we really want to start getting some good media out, just not just exposing what a lot of us already know, but the solutions, what to do about it. We happen to have a few products that actually will help people deal with the repercussions of the clot shot and also with what's coming down on top of our heads and things. So support us, folks. We're working really hard around the clock every single day of the week, trying to make good stuff for you, but do things that help. And then also, again, start really upping, being a little more aggressive about the what do we do about it and reaching more people, because right now we're a critical mass. So Mike, take it away. That's my rant for the day.
Yeah, and as an important solution we'll be talking about today, which is coming from the inside out, understanding what sovereignty is and how your spirit emits that physicality from within you. And when we externalize our power away to Maha and Maga and Haha and whatever else four-letter acronym you want to give your power away to, then the skies are striated with poison. So really excited to have this discussion today with Abe Max and Jason Bodkin as we discuss becoming self-sown. Does the present political pendulum swing contrary to unbridled communism portend a positive shift toward the restoration of the constitutional republic? Perhaps, but an unchecked trend in the opposite direction would be equally devastating to the collective welfare. And the boys downstairs have been working both sides of the fence for centuries. Either way, our predecessors knew the game well and left the door wide open for those who would follow suit by notice of a personal declaration of independence. The unabridged truth is that U.S. Inc. is none of our business. And contrary to the appearance of a democratic elective process, most of us have not been given a seat at the table. Whether the contracted permissions of corporate citizenship satisfy your needs or the adventure of no holds free-ranging ignites your spirit, it's all about the right for self-determination as our creator intended. On this episode, Abe Max and Jason Bodkin join a very special AlphaCast roundtable to further dissect the legal, lawful landscape that has obfuscated the simple truth for far too long. Sovereignty is a state of spirit that cannot be realized by words on a piece of paper, But our discussion will traverse the many supporting technologies we've shared through prior episodes and Alfa Vedic workshops. Abram Max and Jason Bodkin are the creators of Self-Sown Life, a transformative educational journey along the path toward reclaiming autonomy through their own relationships with authority, using the enlifted method to integrate personal understandings for better outcomes and a self-sown life. Self-sown is a journey in self-authorship and the cultivation of wisdom, where the seed of your word becomes the blueprint for your reality. Rooted in the living principles of equity, natural law, and trust, this course empowers you to renegotiate your foundational agreements with the state, quietly and quickly reclaiming the power of your own authority. Through the Enlifted method, a practical adaptation of narrative therapy, you'll build the mindset and resilience needed to stand strong, speak true, and live in accordance with what and who you really are. This is not just a legal education, but a reorientation of being, a bridge out of confusion into clarity and toward the grounded practice of freedom. Wow, Bear, I love that intro. This is so resonating with everything that we always discuss. Take it away, my friend.
Okay. Sorry, I was just taking a sip of water out of my fine crystalware here. Gentlemen, awesome to have you here. And, great hooking up with you in person recently. We sat around the
That
kitchen
was
table
lovely.
at Garvin's place and had a good conversation. So, yeah, really, really good. And let's just continue where we left off there. Maybe some of the things we won't be able to talk about it on the air, but we had a good talk. It really, both of you have a tremendous artistic background, we'll say, or temperament. And I think a lot of solutions are going to have to come from the artist community because artists have a way of tuning in, between the lines, I think, a little better than the average. I started out myself in medicine more with that temperament. And there was this little shift in my life because I always hated school and everything. And then I decided to do everything I'm doing. And I had to kind of go through this little brain tweak to get into calculus and trig and all the crap that I needed for pre-med. And but when I finally got through it all, I really considered my vocation and art. That's why they call it the healing arts. And the solutions for me, it didn't come from all of the left brain stuff that I learned, but from, reading between the lines. So, we're really wanting to hit this law angle over and over and over again because the legal system, along with the medical system, are the two whips that are used to keep the folks in line, we'll say. And we're having a gentleman by the name of Clint Richardson on pretty soon, who's an old timer, really good with really dissecting the language spell that's been cast over us. We're going to go into the two sets of books, that we call the confidential annual financial reports and, reveal a lot more than Doge is revealing right now. And, and just really going back to the basics and understanding what a U.S. citizen is, what U.S. Inc. is. And now we're here to talk today about more what really is, and then even perhaps go beyond the technologies that have been developed to try to re-empower us and really understand what we need to put behind those words on pieces of paper. So either one of you, if you want to, just give it a go here. Tell us your background, how you got into all this, and then we'll get into your work really, just dive in. So thanks for being with us, you guys. This is going to be a fun talk.
Such a pleasure to be here. And I want to touch on something that Mike thought he slipped up on, but it actually was very on point. And that is, he said sovereign tree. And,
yeah, I caught that.
That sovereign tree is rooted in the seed, the fundamental aspect of who we are, who we know ourselves to be, and how that knowing is expressed into the world. And if you come to law from that fundamental seed, that formative causation that unfolds in who we show up in the world as, and how we not only present ourselves, but how we actually perceive and who we are. And that comes into our word, we can start to really plant that tree and grow it out to bear fruit for those who we don't yet know yet, who have not come into being, the 7 generations down the road folks. And I grew up with a deep sense of that, growing up in the wilds of Oregon on 5 acres with my family. We had a big garden. We had a 12-volt car battery that was attached to a single light. And
And if I could interrupt, you were
yeah,
actually raised by a pack of erudite wolves, right?
that's correct. Yeah. And quite erudite. Reading was a huge part of my childhood and growing up, and conversations in and around reading, but also getting hands in it. I was, I was had to be a part of the action. I had to be a part of the family. I had to be a part of the solution to chopping wood, to getting hay, doing all the things with the animals. We had goats and rabbits and a pony and chickens and all of that, gathering eggs. And my brother would tell us that he was the one who did all of the firewood all by himself. And we just sat around and soaked up the heat. And I will guarantee I did not get as much done as my brother, because not many people do. And we all pitched in. And that is part of the milieu of how I came to understand community. Community functions by us all pitching in so that we all succeed. And what are the what are the barriers to that? Where does that come from? How does it function? And how does this interface between who we are interface with these structures that we have grown over time that we now call governments, and we call corporations, and all of those things? And through my recent with my wife, we bought 5 acres here in Elmira, Oregon. And through that process, a deeper overlay of how it is that I maintain my sense of what I need in the overlay of what the building department needs. All of those things that really color our lives in so many ways. How do we interface that? How do we interact with it? And so that led me into the study of a deeper study of law. And that was built on the foundation of my deep love of language and how language shapes our relationships with others in the way we use it and the way we use that to tell ourselves the stories of our own lives, which we call mindset. How do we dig into that? How do we change that story? How do we, as you guys are often talking about, how do we develop a sense of declaration of our own soul, of our own place in this interaction that we call life? So there's a lot there. I could definitely go into any aspect of that in greater detail, and I'm sure we will and I'd like to open it up to Jason to give a little background of himself, if you like. If not, I'll keep talking.
I'm a professional painter. I paint murals and have been doing so for quite some time now. Pictures, they speak 1,000 words, right? There's
Indeed.
something very powerful about the presentation of public art and the way that it interfaces with community and speaks to issues that are sometimes very sensitive and very difficult to talk to or about in ways that are elegant or employing, I think the presentation of murals in public art can employ oblique strategies to talking about difficult issues in a community. And talking about difficult issues in a community is foundational to our ability to co-manage shared resource. And our ability to co-manage shared resources, everything is at the root of all of the problems that we experience today. And that's rooted in communication. Spent a lot of my career developing projects and directing projects that are about shared creativity and community building. Art is a really nice metric to start with as a point of shared creativity or a resource, creativity as a resource, endlessly renewable resource. And that led to a lot of work with environmental issues, water protection specifically. And it was quite an amazing journey to see how powerful it is to give an artist a hat, or anybody in the community, give them a hat which would identify them as an ambassador to a particular issue. To say, hey, deepen your study into this issue of water protection, some sort of environmental threat against it, and become an ambassador within your community to that issue. And more importantly, deepen your emotional and spiritual connection to water itself. That work led directly to working with a lot of First Nation communities in Canada, where I grew up and lived most of my life. And that work engendered a number of very important conversations, very formative in the sense of when you ask an old First Nation person about their relationship to the Indian Act, for example, what does that mean? What is your contract with the government or with the state? And how important is it to understand that, especially when you're looking at how to fix some of the problems that your community is facing? And within a First Nation context, those are some significant problems. And there were a few pretty savvy folks that I talked to that took me aside and said, you know, Jace, white people live on reserves too. They just don't know it. And that was a key teaching for me, as walking away from that saying, oh, okay, if that's the case, then I must also have a relationship to the state, perhaps as a ward of the state, that is parallel to the Indian Act. And what is that what is that contract? And how might I understand it better? And is it possible to renegotiate that contract so that I may have better standing and effectively get something done about the problems that I'm seeing? And that was my introduction, so to speak, some years ago to the world of law. COVID really kick-started that, getting into some of the issues of the last few years in terms of how that broke down, especially in Canada. I lived in Montreal during that time, and experienced some egregious effects. And so I met Abe through the internet on Telegram, where I think a lot of people are having these interesting conversations. That was through a law group that we were studying with. That was Law for Mankind with Greg Paul, some fabulous material. I know that he's a friend of Alfa Vedic. And I reached out to him to say, Abe, I really like what you have to say and how you say it to people, and would like to be your friend. And he accepted that invitation with open arms. And it was only a matter of time, I think, before we began to we began comparing notes as to what we were learning within this field of law. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to it, especially in the alternative law industry, so to speak. And our questions were, what works? And more importantly, how do we get it out there in a way that's cogent and very effective? How do we turn the dial seriously when it comes to our exercising our authority and control over the world that we are experiencing? And many of us feel rather dispossessed of any mechanism for change. So I'll leave it at that. Mm-hmm.
No, brilliant, both of you guys. And you said something very important about creativity being a renewable resource. Well, it's in reality the only truly renewable commodity in existence. And creativity, of course, for the materialist amongst us, is an electrical event that begins the precipitation of every experience and bit of matter that we think we see in front of our faces. And government has made it their business to either control or monetize the very substance that comes as a byproduct of our consciousness. And it's pretty ludicrous when you think about it. But here we are going through all these changes, just trying to, get back, in control of, what comes of from God, basically. So you want to just, either one again, just maybe kind of walk us through the steps of where somebody might start with your coursework?
Sure. The start of it is really understanding your place in that. What is this creative essence? How does that inform? That's the substance that informs our walk through the world. And from that place of understanding the substance of it, you can start to unpack where law comes from and how that natural order of things that we can observe, they're real. We all agree that this is substantive. We don't always agree that it's called a chair, but we all agree that I can do this and it moves, right? Or it moves me. And so from that basic understanding, you have observable facts. And those then come about into how we interact with the transactional aspect of how we, as Jason so eloquently put it, co-manage shared resource. And then we get into complexities of that and how to unpack the complexities of the co-management of shared resource, especially when it comes into contract. I'll do this if you do that, and we'll agree on it. And then when you have multi-parties, you have these structures that arise that we call positive law or positive structures that express in language how those interactions are to be governed between people. And so this course is really sets up the stage for really unpacking the fundamental aspects of how these interactions work. And then really the crux of the biscuit is if those parties don't show up in alignment and not everybody's honorable in that, how do we enforce it? How does the power projection game function? And the enforcement of contract is one of, in my appraisal of the situation, one of the main reasons we have government or these so-called authority structures. Where does that authority come from? That's a fundamental question. And in America, fortunately, it comes from the consent of the governed. So we'll unpack what that means. We gave our consent. Where? So these are literally unpacking implications, as in they're implied. So how do we take it out of the implicit and into the express? How do we come forward with our word to let everybody know where we stand? Because until we do that, we have no standing. So I could go on into the process of the course, but the fundamental aspect of this is there is so much BS to be unpacked and deprogrammed in ourselves to wash away and have a different knowing, a different sense of perspective on our own lives, where we can look at authority and realize for ourselves truly and deeply that we are the author. And Marcia Ann, who we all know, Jason has not met her, really clearly delineates on a number of occasions how it is that this document, for instance, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. I suggest whoever has available internet, go look that up. But it really is an outline of how our attention, our creative essence, is the commodity that fuels these interactions. And it is by a voluntary nature, fundamentally. Now, getting your head around how that happens, most people have a lot of embattlement about the idea of that. How do we begin to unpack that idea? And that's where the enlifted method comes in, is it's a set of tools that I've learned and that apply to a lot of other subsequent things that I've learned in a way that I can guide people for themselves through a practical step of interactions with themselves and their own story, to unpack that and really embody the emotional aspects of our story and somatically process them so we can move through them, not around them, but through them, and really start to craft a new story for ourselves. And that new story is where that seed of self-authorship comes from. Right? Is that, did you want to
Yeah, it
hop in there?
really boils down a lot to the way we feel, in this realm that we are co-creators in, our feelings, our emotion, which we could relate to the astral plane, which is actually part of the etheric mechanism, is what gives the velocity for our experience to, appear, to pop into the matrix, so to speak. So, we can do all sorts of great things and learn, how to, address contracts and things and offers that we get from the government. But if in our feelings we don't own who I am and, really get rid of that nagging doubt that we are the authors of our own experience, and in that respect, it's a spiritual journey. It really is. For our members in our Alfa Vedic community, they have access to a several-day workshop that we did here on the farm with Marcia, and we really hit that point over and over again. And and we also covered what you mentioned, Abe, about silent wars, because that really is the premise of everything we're facing these days. But please, Mike, did you have something you were going to say?
Well, it's just funny because when I love where you're getting at, Abe, when we talk about like voluntarism and self-government, and for those who are just learning this or hearing about it, there is an immediate inert or innate trigger within most folks about and it's interesting, where's this trigger coming from, where they react in sometimes a negative way or a very outspoken way that's insane, that you could have a proper civilization without government in terms of what we know government to be. And where is that coming from, right? That is, I believe, coming from fear. It's coming from a fear of not knowing the alternative, and really where that fear is specifically resonating out of is fear of not knowing oneself and the power that we inherently have, right? So it's so important to tackle this from, as Bear was saying, that deep emotional space, right? Because that I believe is one of the big stimulants of the madness of our current predicament in popular public realm. Where you see the people out protesting right now, resist, as I laugh as they're holding up their signs they bought at Walmart and are worried they're going to lose their 401k because the Wall Street just plummeted, and ironically, it just shot back up. And all of this coming out of fear of the unknown of who they are. And this is great work you guys are doing. Is this sort of where you're coming from first and foremost? Is that launching point?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fear is a big driver for people, right? The law space is very intimidating, as we all know. Any new student of the subject is quite immediately and naturally overwhelmed by the complexity of it, the apparent complexity, and the lifetime of conditioning in relationship to authority that most of us has received is a huge impediment getting into the space where you have a lot riding on that. Your autonomy and your time is built into that mechanism. And so the creation of the course is recognizing that fact, that intimidation factor and that fear factor, and very carefully guiding people from a place where they may not know anything about the law, as they've described the many layers of law, in terms of talking about natural law or divine law, and as they trickle down to what we understand as man-made laws or positive law. And there is a very specific hierarchy, and it's important to understand that. And so we carefully, within the framework of 22 modules of the course, walk a person through the foundational material that we feel is important to understand in order to know who you are in relationship to those pieces, and so that you understand what your expectations are within the framework of a social contract. And it's that social contract that we don't understand, and because we don't understand that, we get into a lot of trouble as individuals trying to interface within the framework of a community attempting to co-manage shared resource. That trouble that we get into is what's called statutory presumption or obligations of law. And that's all built into the social contract. So I'm going to go back to the course itself. 22 modules are self-guided. You walk through at your own pace, and that leads you to a place where you're understanding a foundational mechanism of how to renegotiate your contract with the state, meaning how to reposition yourself in relationship to the statutory presumption and obligations of law. It's an extremely simple process. And we could give it to you on a napkin that we write right now within a couple of paragraphs in terms of
Thank
saying,
you.
yeah, here's how I stand and who I am. And more importantly, here are my terms of service in relationship to how I will continue to work for the state, not on a voluntary basis. However, one of the biggest barriers that we run into in communicating this elegant simplicity to people is disbelief. Well, it can't be that simple. It's impossible. I mean, what about the entirety of legalese and that language and this and this and that? And it's like, right, all of those things are fair and true, and they're important to have a grasp of. But there are some foundational principles that you got to know first in order to, as Abe described, have correct standing. And then when you renegotiate that contract with the state to fundamentally identify to the Attorney General, statewide and federally, to say, hey, there's nobody that represents my interest in your government currently. And if you want to deal with me, I'll be over here. I'm interested in private representation. I'm present in myself. I don't need somebody to represent me. And in case you ever need me to do any work for you, here's my terms of service. Let's just throw out a fake number there, $3,000 an hour, minimum of 3 hours, billable. I'm going to need payment up front, and before I do anything, a waiver of liability, ensuring that you're covering my ass for anything that I do that I may do mistakenly. Who holds the liability? And so when Abe's talking about the power of the unlifted method in relationship to the exercise of our authority or our renegotiated contract with the state, we're very quickly placed into a position of Mexican standoff with government agents who say, well, son, that's not how we do it around here. And who aren't going to necessarily understand what you have done because they have been equally dispossessed of their knowledge of statutory presumption and obligation of the law as it functions. And so now we're back into, as you so importantly described, the spiritual and emotional function of our ability to navigate law. And if we can't take control of the stories that are racing through our minds at all points of time, especially as we're up against or up in front of, not against, up in front of a government agent whose expectations are being projected upon us, if we can't negotiate that space by creating some emotional and spiritual clarity and distance from that narrative, we get into trouble. So the unlifted method, as a very powerful adaptation of narrative therapy, very pragmatic, allows us to create that space as we work together to understand what these contracts are and how to renegotiate them?
Having had my fair share of interactions with government usurpers, it's amazing. I can just kind of think back in the early days into, more recent times where how powerful it is when you're just talking to somebody at the county or a code enforcement person or even an IRS person over the phone, when you just calmly say, no thanks. And isn't it logical that in any other endeavor, if somebody wanted some of our energy, we just say, well, no, I'm really not, open to that. Or else you just simply say, well, okay, how much you going to pay me? That's just the way the real world works. And I love the fact that you're saying how simple it is because, if I go back decades when I got involved in this, it was so convoluted. And of course, we just didn't know any better. And it was this constant back and forth game of gotcha. But through that, we got into some trouble along the way. We had some successes, but it also taught us. And finally, looking back and distilling all that, we experienced, it really is so simple that you can just recontract on a napkin, as you say. So that's where we need to go. And what I just want to bring that up because for our audience that thinks that they have to go through these embattlements and, scary confrontations, that's been there, done that. You don't have to do that anymore. All you have to know is who are you? And who are these folks? And these folks that we think are so scary, they're usually not that really savvy, talented, or educated, and also are emotionally childlike themselves. So when they're just let's just say related to in an adult fashion, they really aren't that scary anymore. So, I love that what you're doing is just starting from that premise. So people don't have to walk back and go through all these complicated processes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that is a main factor. And I just want to point out a very key concept that we touched on. I want to expand a little bit, and that is that once you have this knowing, it doesn't end there. You can put forward your terms of service and I'll gladly accept orders for such and such amount. Here's my terms of service, here's my contract number, all of that. If you put forward that state of being in the form of notice, and then you or say somebody comes to you and asks you to do something counter and you slip up for a bit and you perform on that order without reestablishing that I don't work for free, and you just go ahead and do it, you've just re-volunteered. You've just renegotiated your contract. And so a major aspect of this is that this is a state of being, and it is a constant endeavor, just like waking up every day and breathing. So it has to be a seed that you deeply root in real soil of knowing. And that knowing gives you the ability to say no. And if you don't have that ability and that deep knowing, tread lightly, because these sandboxes that we call positive law, corporations, these fictions, are there to our benefit in actuality for those times when we don't know how to play well with others and we don't know the power of our own word. They're a framework to discover that within so that we get the most benefit for the most people within that sandbox. And so by operating in the person, which is our representation, our utility, our ship within that citizenship, our person has some clearly defined sets of parameters and operational procedure set to it. And some of those are called rights. They're privileges in actuality. And some of those privileges are you have the privilege to have somebody else enforce good behavior on you if you don't know how to operate well. You know, you have the privilege under the Uniform Commercial Code to imprisonment, to extortion, to any number of things. I highly suggest reading about that. It's also in the course. And so once you start to develop this relationship with your person, and that person is not you, but it is a tool of fiction that you interact in that space with, you can start to use that tool much more effectively and do away with the need for somebody else enforcing your good behavior because you know how to do that yourself. Right? Make sense?
So does that mean we can wear two hats? You can have your person with your assigned numbers and so forth within the citizenship realm and traverse both worlds. We don't have to go out and maybe rescind all of those numbers and such.
That is correct. It's like I have a cup. I use it to drink coffee or tea or water, whatever my pleasure. That doesn't mean I am the cup in this sense, you know? And so that is a tool. It's like a knife can be used to cut a steak, it can be used to dig, or it can be used to hurt somebody. You know, it's a matter of your own ability to use the tool and to know its parameters. You don't grab it by the sharp end. And that is an inversion. And so if you think you are the person, that's an inversion. It's a reverse of natural flow, and it leads to controversy. It leads to conflict. And so when you have the substance informing the formality, then that form on a I-9 or whatever actually has some substantive quality to it that you can stand on. You know, it's actually grounded in something.
Wow,
Right.
I like the tool analogy because I've often used the avatar analogy. That's just your avatar that allows you to go into the virtual landscape, the fiction, right? We've often talked about the legal being fiction, right? And so why not maintain that connection through your avatar? Because really, you want to be able to go in and enjoy the game when it suits you, but then to be able to step out into the natural world as well that is real for the purposes of why we're here, right? Why we're being created. So why would you sever that avatar when it can benefit you in ways? But I do like this analogy better of the tool because that is more empowering and it makes a lot more sense to me. So thank you. I've just learned something awesome today.
Excellent.
And in the Uniform Commercial Code, they use languaging such as transmitting utility.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we equate that on a spiritual level, it makes perfect sense that if the tool that is, our persona and citizenship is a transmitting utility, what a wonderful way to bring our consciousness and bring light into this dead corporate system.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, learn how to use the person, learn to control it through contract. It's all contract.
Yeah,
all
contract
commercial.
supersedes legal. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on equity and how that can be wielded as a means to, I don't know, back up the private within the public. That makes sense.
Absolutely, equity always trumps common law. It trumps it all. I pass it to you to unpack some of that.
Well, I mean, I highly suggest the maximum of equity as a deep inner relationship with knowing in how we have come to know the space of ourselves. And, you know, let's take it to a practical level. We were talking about not fulfilling orders for free. Where does that come from? If we all consented to be governed, then that's voluntary. There's a great maxim. Equity will not aid a volunteer.
Yep.
You apply that to this international standard that we call involuntary servitude, which is illegal and unlawful in every country on the planet at the highest level of law because it is a complete aberration of divine and natural order. We can look at that and go, okay, so involuntary servitude, otherwise known as slavery. Do you willfully consent to slavery? No, not necessarily, but you might imply to be a volunteer. And so equity will not serve you if you have volunteered to provide a service without pay. You know, you might volunteer at the soup kitchen. You don't go after the fact and go, well, that was really a longer shift serving soup to the homeless. I think you need to pay me some. You don't have a claim. You have a hollow proposition because you volunteered to do that. And so how do we step out of this voluntary status? So there's a maximum of equity for you that is really powerful to really dig into what that means and how it is that we have volunteered, right?
So can either one of you, equity is kind of self-explanatory, but maybe we're throwing it around as more of a technology, that can be employed in our affairs. Can you maybe explain exactly what we're talking about when we say equity?
Jason, did you want to field that?
In terms of practical terms of how that might unpack itself, yes, absolutely. And that goes back to a situation whereby, let's say you're given an order by the state to perform in a certain way. I want to take it back to contract here. The social contract is an implicit contract in the way that you agree to that contract by your behavior. Some of that behavior includes silence because you don't rebut that contract, you've agreed to it. In the same way as if you show up to the barber shop down the street and you sit down in the chair, you don't have to turn to that barber and say, I consent to you cutting my hair, sir. The barber gets it as soon as you sat down into that chair. And the way that we behave in society, aligned with the benefits and privileges of being participant in this society, are part of that contract. And so you are bound to the rules of that social contract, whether you know it or not, if your behavior aligns with that. If you are not aware of those things and you are participant in them, you're part of it. And so we briefly talked about the role of protesting and getting out there and trying to work for your human rights. Well, those things aren't effective because ultimately showing up in those places without the awareness of how to control your person through contract indicates that you're simply willing to stomp around like a child, throwing a temper tantrum, saying, I don't like what you're doing, but I'm not prepared to do anything about it because I don't know how to hold you accountable.
Yeah, and in effect, they're in dishonor because they're within that contract. And they're
sure they are.
Yeah.
But they don't understand something really important, which is to say, if we're speaking to the government, and if we have a shared understanding that the government itself is just a bunch of men and women occupying offices within that, and those offices are in service to the population, as such, they are servants, civil servants, then who is the master in that situation? And more importantly, the question becomes, in what reality does the servant ever give the master orders? And once you start to unpack that for yourself as to saying, what role am I occupying? And how do I live in relationship to this vessel in commercial activity? And how do I renegotiate those things? You're kind of stuck into a contract which can be very uncomfortable for some people. And it's easy to complain about those things, very difficult to do anything about them. Now, once you rebut those presumptions of law that the government holds with you, for example, the guy comes to say, well, you owe us taxes. And you say, well, I'm more than happy to pay my taxes. My checkbook is standing by. I would draw to your attention the fact that I have renegotiated the contract with the state. I'm no longer a participant in your presumption of my behavior and what it needs to be. So in order for me to fulfill your offer of service here, or this order, I'm going to need payment up front and waiver of liability. As soon as you get me those, I'm clearing my schedule off because I could use the cash. If you don't have either of those things, then I'm busy. Don't waste my time. And we don't have to be rude with it, but we have to understand that your time is the most valuable thing that you possess. It is the only thing that cannot be restored. I take your property, I take your car, I take your money. We can get those things back to you. I take your time, it ain't coming back. It is the most valuable thing that you have in life, and it is the underpinning of all that are referred to as your rights. So if the person continues, if this agent of the state continues to push you, then in fairness to that relationship, okay, sure. If this is where you're going, I'm just not going to do anything until you meet my terms. And if you persist, then you flip the burden of proof on them to prove how they are not enslaving you. And that's equity in action. You don't have to, I mean, you're not standing in dishonor by complaining or saying, this is against my rights to do this. No, you're saying, oh, this is an offer of service. This is commercial. You're offering me a contract. Sure, here are my terms. Meet my terms. And you're inviting them to step into your contract by their behavior. And so the point is, and this is a big part of the course, is not only learning how to renegotiate your contract with the state, but effectively learning the basics of civil procedure so that when they step into your terms, you know how to enforce them. And that's regional. We can't teach people exactly how to walk that path, but we can tell them where to go and what instrument needs to be used in terms of saying, a summary decision by the judge. You're basically indicating to a judicial body that this person stepped into my contract, they owe me money. And
Here's the facts and evidence.
here's the facts and evidence that support that. Here's the law that supports that. And it's successful.
Yeah.
And so one of our teachers in this subject and in this particular approach, it was successful to the degree that he won 100 cases in a row in Canada.
So it's really a game of hot potato where now you're just putting them in a position where they have to rebut your presumptions. The catch, though, is that your presumptions are based on natural law.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hard to rebut without getting themselves in hot water.
Natural law is contract law.
Mm-hmm. And to take a different angle for those who are not familiar with the space, equity is a set of observations encapsulated in very simple terms that we might call the philosophic underpinnings of law in practice. So they are part philosophy, but part actionable aspects of how we have figured out how to resolve conflicts really cleanly over time. And they are based on facts and evidence as seen through the lens of what is right. And these are the underpinnings of how we get into all of these things that over time become codified, as in they become habituated in the way we've always done things that we call common law. And that common law is common, as in it's in use because we've kind of to get some procedural elements that everybody can abide by, we have structured this, and we call those codes, acts, and statutes. I mean statutes. And these codes, acts, and statutes, administrative procedures, are effective for fictions operating with other fictions. When it steps out of the realm of fictions, you can step into equity, back into equity through due process, and find real remedy. And so in the West, there's been a tendency to mix common law with equitable practice in kind of a hybridization. And in order to operate in that, if you are still operating your person in the public, you would need to prove in this sense that you have exhausted the ability for remedy within the legal structure and file to go, hey, I'm stepping into equity because that is not the proper theater, the proper jurisdiction to gain remedy in a lawful process. The only way this can be done is through equitable proceedings to see my order performed because I have facts and evidence that are outside of the common law. They have a foundation in principle that were through solid agreement. And, you know, who is it that makes corporations? It's men and women sitting around the table having an idea and going, we're going to commonly call this thing that we're creating a corporation. And so at the root of it, there's another maxim. If you create it, you own it. Transverse of that, if you do not create it, you do not own it. And so the creation of that corporation at its fundament is a meeting of minds and an agreement, which are fundamental aspects of contract. And so when you can prove that this comes up out of equity, you can always bring it back to equitable jurisdiction. Does that make sense, Bear?
That was an incredible summation. You really nailed it there. Yeah, it's based on the universal precepts of what is right, what is God's law. And these are universal and indestructible, right?
Yeah.
They're rational. Yeah, one of the maxims of equity is it will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy.
Correct.
And so that's what's so beautiful about it. There's always remedy because we live in a place that was created by a divine, infinite, omnipresent, omniscient being that created all of this place for us to. And this is why I love equities, because it ties directly into divine law. And it's a signpost for when it works to prove to people that actually this isn't an evil place. There are those that have manipulated us into believing that, but in the end, this is a God-created, beautiful, loving realm. And that is what I love when I see equity work. It's right. It proves that.
Yeah. And real quick, Bear, I just want to make a point of concision here. And that is that, yes, equity is up out of God's natural creation and our place in it. And we still have to do the work, as in we have to come to the table. If we need remedy in equity, we have to come to the table with facts and evidence to back our claim and proper accounting of what happened. And so,
and another maxim, equity aids the vigilant, not those who slumber
boom,
on their rights.
Exactly. Thank you, Mike, for popping that one in there, because that's exactly it. One has to come to the table with real knowledge and due diligence and due process to know procedure, because that's the way we interact with each other cleanly. So, Barry, you were about to say?
Oh, I was just going to add that, if you just step back a little bit and look at both parties in any interaction, it's really a service that we're providing for state actors, because they are now given the opportunity to realize the downside of creating a liability. And the fact that when you do that, then you do, in fact, own it if you are in a relationship with somebody that knows of what you guys are speaking on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've firsthand seen a few folks wish that they'd never done that in the first place.
Yeah, and there is an inroad there for cleaning up our own mess, because this is our mess. It's not them. The victim mentality is strong, and it has, as my buddy Mark England, my instructor at Enlifted, says, the victim mentality has more flavors than Baskin Robbins. It shows up all over the place. And anytime you find yourself projecting onto the world, they did this to me, you're setting up an emotional disturbance in yourself that it's a great inroad to look at where it is. Where do I feel it in my body? What's happening? What does that word do? right? Try that, Bear. Say that sentence. They did that to me. Come
Doesn't
on,
even
you
I
can do
can't.
it.
he doesn't even want
No,
to
I
put that
can't.
out into the field.
I know,
Talk about
but
rocky road.
this is part of the process of renegotiating our own language landscape, is that I can say that and I can observe the emotional disturbance it creates, because it obviously does, and go, okay, where is it in my body? Oh, it's right here in my stomach. And I can go, oh, it's in my stomach. Breathe that in a little bit, and I can go, okay, how do I change that story? They did that for me. Okay, what's the emotional change? It starts to move that energy, it starts to create space. And when you add the breath into those changes, you can start to really embody that change, right? And so there's a coming together of the vast experience of people like you, Bear. I grew up around a guy, it's a little tangent, but I grew up around a guy named Billy Smith. He was a gold miner, lived out in the middle of nowhere in rural Oregon. And, he was one of those very self-sufficient, cantankerous Oregon gun-toting hicks out in the hills, who was early on in the sovereign on the land kind of movement, the freeman on the land kind of thing. And, he was very embattled about his relationship with the state, but he understood how to take his ownership of his own action and behavior. And he didn't actually have that in his heart that they did this to me. He said, this is my responsibility to own my own place in it. And, he got rid of his license plate. He got rid of his license and all of that stuff, carried a bond on his car, knew how to uphold it. And it was a really hard road. And I just want to put out a word of thanks to all those folks that I grew up around and that I didn't know but heard about, who went through these things as trailblazers in this space to relearn what, in the 1800s, I think was very well known, of how to operate in commerce and contract in a clean and honorable way, you know? Um, and so, yeah. So, did you have something to add to that, or?
What about, so one of the crux things that we always get when we get into this stuff about contract, implied contract as a citizen, is this idea of the original meeting of the mind with that child coming in that was never educated or informed that they were contracting, right? That it was implied, and now they are put within the system through their own ignorance. And I know ignorance is no excuse in the law, but this is a major hurdle for a lot of people who are just learning about this, to understand how that's fair, how that system is actually for us, when it's an implied servitude, if you will. How do you guys go about explaining that, and in relation to law and in relation to sovereignty, and how that inherently works, if you know what I'm getting at here?
You want to jump in, or?
Well, with great detail in the course, certainly that's a key aspect of it, understanding how some of those relationships are created, and how to unpack them. The system's quite beautiful. It's quite workable. We've been radically dispossessed of our knowledge of how to use it. When we look at schools and their original purpose in America, for example, they were all about teaching law to their students, and then it became something different eventually. But the core intent was to teach people how to exercise their rights within that framework. Up until the 1930s in America, for example, the best-selling books were all civil law, and so everybody who had an education understood how to use that. Now, having been so dispossessed of our understanding of those, of the practical nature and the very approachable nature of these tools, we're in a state where we have no real idea, and this can be very intimidating. In order to figure out how you're going to, what rights you have or how you can stand on those. But no, effectively we're moving it. There's some tough pieces to unpack in terms of how you present some of the basic realities of your birth certificate. the social contract, and those pieces. And yeah, we've done our best in the course in terms of how to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess just unpacking this a bit in terms of the inheritance that we received from those who were before us that began that path of ignorance, right? And how those connections work. And this gets pretty spiritual in relating to our bloodlines, our forefathers, and the karma that we are now, I guess, experiencing due to people before us and the decisions they've made as all this information has been lost in this way, you know?
Let's bring it into a practical lens, and that is, what are our stories? Our stories are a way of passing down a habituated perspective on things. And that habituated perspective that I have will be passed down onto those that I communicate with as they grow up into adulthood, and so on and so forth over generations. And that becomes our collective story. And that collective story can be very powerful in how it is that we interact with each other over time. And yes, unpacking that, what Tom Barnett calls lore, and it accurately, that lore that we all interact with, that space, the ancestral paradigm, the sins of our fathers through another lens. How do we come to terms with the sins of our fathers so that we can integrate them in ourselves? And, that is a story. It is not this moment that we happen to be living in, connecting with each other here now through our word. That is a story. And so that's why when I came into this, I was really interested in how do I help and teach those who are coming into adulthood tools to negotiate that contract well. And through that process of discerning how to approach that, I found this methodology of narrative work. And if one keeps their story in their head, spinning at a fast rate in a habituated process, that is the victim mentality in action. And that is also our energetic churn of that inherited emotional story. And when we are able to get that out of our head onto paper, we can start to play with our words and unpack that habituated process, that story. And through unpacking that story, start to play with our words and literally start to have fun with changing those words, seeing what they do, how they interact with that emotional space. And we can start to breathe through into a new type of breath. And that breath then informs our word to change that habituated story of our ancestral lineage in action. And so it really is, like Bear's constantly saying and constantly accurately saying, it's an inside job. And that includes our attachment to the stories of our ancestral lineage and the stories of our culture, or the stories of our society and our civil interactions. It's our job to maintain its health individually and as a community. It's not them, right? Does that add some clarity to that?
Yeah, brilliant. And energetically, and by that I mean physically as well, what we're all embodied for, I believe, is to release all the attachments that are built from centuries of crystallized momentum that, is literally like extracting ourselves out of concrete. And that, of course, allows our freedom on a much more fundamental level than simply saying, okay, I don't have to pay taxes anymore or something. But first, we've got to go through the stories. And my personal journey, and just in hindsight, what I got out of my vocation in medicine, as well as going pretty deep into the lawfare realm, is when you learn how things really work and how to deal with them the way you're teaching, then those stories fall by the wayside one by one. Now, when you don't have that to deal with anymore, now you can really get at the pure energetic, free of story, and get on to what we're really here to do, which is to be, eternally free, not just, free from property taxes or something. But they're stepping stones, and they're just, just vital in our development. There's a great book that we've mentioned a few times on our platform here. It's called Brother, the Third Degree. And it's about a couple and their two children. And in a nutshell, they're going through their freedom process, which some people would call ascension or whatever. Now, they were at a very high level of adeptship. And they described how in their journey, they were brought, because this is a prior time, less recent. And at that time, historically, when a person's light had been expanded to a certain amount, they were invited into inner retreats where they really, were given guidance to go further into their so-called ascension process. But part of that training is they had to learn the outer mechanisms of law, medicine, and finance, because even though it was all a facade, they were required to know that so that they could not be vulnerable to it. And so I really believe, and as in the Ascended Master teachings, they say this very explicitly, that our trials and tribulations, our initiation so far is in the outer world. We're in a different epoch now, where it's not about being sequestered on a mountaintop or going into inner retreats. Our initiation is in the outer world. So if we, I think, approach, our situations medically, legally, and so forth, from that perspective, then these are all opportunities when you get an offer from the IRS or some kind of state actor to see it for what it is and use it to exercise your authority and to get rid of the story. So, it's just so much more valuable, I think, than we give it credit for a lot of us that, I'll look back, I initially got into it because I was pissed off at the IRS and everybody else. But, now I realize that it had nothing to do with that. It was, it was about me and, my personal journey. And I thank every state actor that was ever a nuisance in my life, because it was very instrumental in my own personal evolution.
Brother
and,
of the third degree right here, Bear.
There you go.
Actually gifted this to me. Will Garver is the author.
Yeah.
It's a great,
wonderful book. And everything you're talking about in law is so applicable to everything in medicine. With all of the folks that I would, manage their medical cases, we really went through a re-indoctrination of sorts, where whenever I heard somebody say I'm sick or I have this, or it's like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
You are now continuing that reality into the next moment. And until, we realize the power of that decree, of our authority into the ethers, it creates our reality. Guess what? There's no doctor in the world that's going to be able to cure that. And, it's another level of victim, not to say that we don't have empathy for people that are going through issues. But there's only one way out of this, and that's get out of the victim mentality.
Yeah.
And I just add one more thing too: the ability to look yourself in the mirror and love yourself. In this book, Brother of the Third Degree, he goes through this classic hero's journey, the initiate, who has to go into the dark underworld, sort of, Bear, if you remember, and he has to go across the river, and there's a lot of that same story in all these great heroes' journeys. And it makes me think of the great film Empire Strikes Back, where Luke goes to see Yoda, and he has his initiation where he goes into the dark jungle there, and he sees Darth Vader. And I've mentioned this before on previous Alpha casts. And what's he do? Instead of facing that evil internally and standing up to, well, we find out as his father, he takes out the lightsaber and cuts his head off, and he finds that it was actually his own head that he'd cut off. And that's what the protesters are doing right now. And so, yeah, that's an important part of the initiation, right? The ability to look at your dark side, at your shadow, and see what it's there for a purpose, and to be able to incorporate that in a way that's in alignment with natural law and your I am. And then that's part of the journey here, right? I would say, Abe, right, with what you guys are talking about, because we've discussed this before at Music and Sky, actually, around the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a major part of it is, you know, I didn't quite catch the question in that, so I'm caught agreeing with you. Could you restate the question real quick?
The question is how do we incorporate our dark side, our shadow, and facing that part within, because we all have had trauma and stuff, but inherently there is darkness to the light, and that doesn't need to necessarily be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, well, it starts with where everything starts. It starts with our will. And that is often called a willingness. You must have a willingness to want to look there. And without that, there is no change possible. And so, like Bear was talking about, you can throw any medicine at certain ailments. You can throw any prescriptive law at certain embattlements. You can throw as much money as you have into the pool of your happiness. They're hollow without a willingness to change oneself from within and build upon a newly founded sense of yourself into something new. And so once people make that decision to have a willingness to want to change, to put it kind of in the Greg Paul parlance, it then can be possible to seek out tools and to seek out new ways of looking at it, new perspectives, new relationships. And so, yeah, I can help people. I work with people, not for them. And so I can work with someone once they choose to put their will into it, to want to change that in themselves. So without that, they're not going to. They might probably say that for a day or two, and then it'll drop off, kind of like the empty promises many of us have fallen into with New Year's resolutions, for instance. Same thing. One's a little bit more gross in the reality, as in more simplified and obvious, and some are more refined. But one can't get into those refined territories without showing up for yourself, with yourself, and asking for help if you need it. Right? So that answer your question?
So how do we find your courses and, get your material?
Well, the course is online. It's at Sown, SOWN.life, selfsown.life. Unfortunately, the course is not yet available. We've got our hands full with a bunch of different projects. I think when you come to terms with some very simple and effective legal mechanisms, you become popular. And there's a lot of need in the community here in Oregon and surrounding region, with people who have some amazing projects or amazing momentum, and they've needed support, and we've taken on board some of that. And so right now, in terms of the delivery of the course, we're probably about 2 or 3 weeks away from actual soft launch or opening of the project. People can go to the website and subscribe to the newsletter. That's going to be the easiest, and we'll update them as soon as it's up. But right now, our hands are full with supporting a man out of Southern Oregon, near Ashland, named Scott Good. He's pioneered some very interesting territory into long-term soil stewardship and the creation of terra preta. It's very remarkable. Abe and I are
Jason, say that again. Missed you on that word. Terra preta. Is that what you said?
Terra preta. Yep. Yeah. Abe would be better to explain the mechanism of terra preta, but effectively, our interest in the project is recognizing that high quality food security is an extremely important point of leverage within communities for practicing autonomy or sovereignty. And so we're supporting Scott in securing the land that he's done 15 years of research on, working diligently to amplify his research globally, because it is an extremely useful set of tools he's come up with and are applied with shovel and rake without the use of petrochemical or anything of that sort. So it's a very pragmatic approach. And what we're doing to support that work is creating a trust-based governance system or a model around that. Because going back to what we talked about earlier, you may have an excellent tool in terms of soil stewardship, but if you can't bring it to communities in ways that communities can effectively co-manage that shared resource, especially within the framework of the private, you've not got much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
is
giving us a
that
bit of a delay.
more in the line of a community cohesion, or is it incorporate actual like products or just techniques? Can you give us a little more tease on that?
Foundationally, it's about mechanisms and methods in practice and practicality to co-manage shared resource, to really have a solid foundation so that over time people know the rules of engagement and function so that it operates well. That's the foundational aspect of that. As far as Scott's work, he's got 15 years of very, very well delineated research and proof of claim. On top of that, he's really engaging. He's an excellent teacher. Some of these things are known quantities within permaculture and the paradigm of permaculture and dry land farming and its application. What he has described and replicated and proven out is through his work as a USGS soil engineer. And as a USGS soil engineer, he found a way of modeling to describe these things that happen naturally and how to replicate them in the garden to essentially really maximize the biological siphon aspect of dryland farming, where you're actually creating a water differential at the bottom and through the biology, allowing that to equalize uphill and then circulate back down to the bottom at once it has gone to the top by percolating back down. What happens in these trenches is really quite interesting, and Scott obviously could describe it in much greater detail than I can, but it's a process similar to what he saw in coal formation and deposition, in that the process of these these trenches of biomass and very layered in a very specific way, settle out the hydrophobic aspects of what is being formed and purify out and also create that electrical differential for it to equalize into these microtubules created by the worms and their casting. And as it moves through that, it also picks up the nutrients and brings it into the next phase. And so it's a very elegant process of mirroring what natural processes happen, and a high resolution look at how it is that our ancestors were relearning these things. Our ancestors knew this. This is the substrate that is found all throughout the Amazon jungle, for instance, where it's most popularly known, terra preta, as being this man-made stewardship, an aspect that was built. How did they build it? Well, this is an inroad to really looking at how they built it and how to maximize that interaction for proper stewardship through the lens of permaculture, and is a replicable model. So we want to allow this to have people to be able to access this very clearly stated. And that's one of the things I've noticed in that community is that in many people want you to come along to help them figure it out with them. And that's great. It's a great exercise, and it's inefficient for the needs of the time. The 14 plus years of experience, plus the foundational elements of where Scott comes from professionally, are a method that we can really teach others efficiently. He's got
So does this incorporate the use of biochar?
no. And Scott has much to say about biochar and why this is very different from biochar and how its efficacy is more effective.
Wow.
And
So would you
I'm
guys
sure he would love to come on your show. So
yeah,
yeah.
I was going to say, if I'd love to have all three of you guys on, that would be a wonderful discussion. I'd like to know more what he's doing.
Maybe we can come up and do a farm talk.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that
So
would be
how
epic.
is he up? Sorry, Mike.
He's in the
Is
Rogue
he up
Valley.
close by you there?
He's in the Rogue Valley.
Oh, it's
Oh,
close.
not too far away.
No, easy drive.
Are you guys, you think he'd be in the mood for a road trip?
Oh, I'm sure he would love it. And you guys would get
Amazing.
on. So
Way cool.
yeah.
And it's getting warm here, so we're going to start doing some porch talks. We started last year, and yeah, already got some lined up. Yeah, I'd love to have you guys up here. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's on our list of things to do for sure. And anyway, we can talk about some other things offline, but
Okay.
yeah, Adam Bigelson is going to be coming through
Yeah, he'll be here.
and so he's definitely reached out to me to hang out and suggested hanging out at your place also. So I love being in the
Nice.
community. If for the viewers who don't know, I'm also a part of the Alfa Vedic co-op. I love their products. I use them. My wife uses them. Jason also. And speaking of my wife, I'd like to thank her for showing up in my life to allow me the space to move through the process of developing this coursework and doing the broader work, because it takes a lot of faith and courage to stand behind, not just behind, but stand beside a man like me. And she really is the force that guides my perspectives in so much clear reflection of where I'm at and how I'm showing up in the world. And so big thanks to her. I know she's watching, and a lot of love to her. On my birthday, today
Oh
is
yeah.
my 48th.
Today's your birthday?
Happy solar
It is.
return.
And
Ooh, you're one of those Aries characters, huh?
You couldn't tell.
Actually, I knew that.
Yeah. And what a great way to spend my birthday, hanging out with my homies, talking about things that are near and dear to my heart, and really digging into the meat of finding real solutions so that I have another birthday next year worth living for. And so that those around me do also. And generating cleanliness and clarity in my world around me. And with that comes from that within myself. And so on this, my birthday, I'm going to give a great big deal of thanks and gratitude for the grace that Creator has afforded me to show up in the world, to enact His will in the world, and to be a part of that solution, and to bring the tools that I've learned into the practicality. There's a lot of people talking about the soul's path and ascension and transcendence and all of those things. And right now, what's needed are clear tools to actually implement in our lives, because we are at a transitory state right now where if we don't start exercising and expressing our right, we're going to lose them.
Yep.
And so it's a call to action. And that action implies that you have tools to work with. And if you're not up to speed, now's the time to get up to speed, because that's slipping away. And people got to show up for themselves and for their community and for the well-being of our commons. And this is about developing a relationship with that space of the commons so that we can interact with it. As my native friends say, we can interact with it in a good way. That's a good piece.
I was actually going to ask originally, it's a great sort of full circle here, because looking at Jason's work, I was looking at your Instagram yesterday and just some of the fantastic murals you've done in the public square, right? And I see that as an amazing technique and powerful tool for bringing the private into the public, right? And so how do we manage moving forward? Because traditionally, a lot of times the commons, the public square, of course, has been managed by government, right?
Yeah.
These are the public lands. And this is often an interesting debate within voluntarism and anarchism, and especially anarcho-capitalism, right?
Mhm.
Who is to manage this? And Alex Eck and I have had some fun conversations about this. And I said, it's quite easy. It's the law manages it, right? And
I have plenty to say about that, Mike. Plenty to say about it.
yeah. So, and I just asked, so I have two questions to kind of sum us up. So one, how do you envision moving forward in for private property rights and in relation to stewardship of land? And then two, how do we interface that with community? And I'm saying this kind of selfishly because, we're developing the Music and Sky Village, and I want to
I'm in the mix on.
Yes. So these are two really, I think, powerful questions that people haven't totally solved. And also, I think we can be great innovators in that space.
Absolutely. First off, as far as the commons part of it and how to maintain that, elected officials are trustees in essence. And a trustee means that you have a bounding box, which we call rules of engagement, laws, and the legal processes therein. And so those are what is called, as a trustee, you have fiduciary responsibilities, meaning you have liability that you're carrying to operate in a certain way. And what has been lost is people's ability to hold trustees to that bounding box through upholding their fiduciary responsibilities. Now, once you understand the trustee beneficiary relationship, where the people are the beneficiaries of those trustees that are holding office, then one can start applying the right kind of guidance. And that guidance is through proper notice and, understanding the mechanisms of enforcing the liability that they carry through things like, and this is one thing, and I don't suggest anybody just go out and do this without really knowing what it is, but lien, a commercial lien. For instance, as a contractor, when I was building homes, I gave my clients, by the nature of my contract with the state, what I call, what's called a contractor's license, I was required to give clients, these people I worked for on their homes, a notice of my right to file a lien on their property for failure to pay or failure to perform on a contract. Now, these people enter into a public-private contract when they show up to that job as an official, sitting in office as a trustee. And so you have the right to file a lien if they are in breach of that contract. And that's where people like Cal Washington and others are doing great work in their knowledge and presenting people with tools in that knowledge space to learn how these processes work, how to apply them, and how to apply them honorably so that you don't find yourself in a real pickle. Because that's a real possibility if you show up unaligned and without clarity.
And what you're mentioning there is like just with Cal, just the notice of liability, right? That you're noticing them. Hey, you're liable as a trustee here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And, you have to let them know that they've stepped out of that box and give them opportunity to come back to it, because forgiveness and redemption are law. They are the foundation of, especially our Western law, that redemptive quality. I mean, it does speak to commerce, doesn't it? What do you redeem a coupon, you redeem, et cetera. And so you have to give them opportunity to step into the proper alignment with that commercial contract. And, when you apply that kind of pressure, if they know how to read the lay of the land, they're going to step back in line. And so that's the fundamental aspect. And that goes back into how these private trusts and all of those things operate, is that their fiduciary responsibility is to the laws of the land, and the laws of this land particularly, which is why we're so under the gun, says that the government shall not impinge on any private contract. Meaning that if Jason and I have a meeting of minds and we come to terms and we have an agreement, we shake on that agreement, that is a private contract. We have not invited Bear Lando into that contract, unless by another meeting of minds we update that contract and say, hey, Bear, we'd like you and Mike to come into this contract with us. Okay, now we have a multi-party contract, but it's still private. Now, if we want to interact with the public, we have a number of mechanisms to do that with. We can each individually do it through our person. We can file a corporation. We can, all these different avenues that we can explore, know the landscape. And since we know that we are a private contract, we have opportunity to go, oh, we can maintain we know how to keep our own books. We know how to keep our minutes. We know how to live by the rules that we've set forward here. And we're going to do that in honor. And we'll interface with the state where they're needed, which is enforcement of that contract through the judiciary. That's their job. And if they step out of that binding box, we can go in good faith. You weren't a party to this contract. Your only job in this contract is enforcing it on my behalf as a citizen, because that's the relationship we have defined. So once you understand that and know it, you can operate in a very different way that's very clean. It doesn't do away with the need for that. It actually brings it into more clarity and focus so that you can use the tools we have at hand, more diligently and with more efficacy, more enforceability, more actionable claim to right relationship with it.
Liens are very effective leverage mechanisms. I've used them against rogue state actors, and they worked. You want to know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And,
of
and
utmost
do it
importance.
properly.
Yeah.
So you don't.
Everybody listening, take note of that point. This is something that one needs to educate themselves in and around, and really lean into that presentment, know thyself, because they are not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And it's very, very important, because that can cause a lot of chaos in one's life and in one's community. And that's not where we're headed. Where we're headed is more coherence, more clarity, and more right relationship with it. And so if you don't know how these things work, learn them. If you don't have interest in learning them, go with the sandbox that's created on our behalf, so that we have a nice way of engaging that works well enough for most.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to entertain, those more advanced mechanisms like liens, it's all about enforcement. So it's a waste of time if you can't go there, or if you don't have the cojones to go there. Yeah, but I wouldn't try it at home unless I really knew, what was happening. Another thing, just to segue back, to where we're rounding things up. Another gathering we're going to have here is Gabriel and the Anastasia folks are going to be doing a little tour of the farm. So that might be a fun time if you guys want to, I'll let you know when that's happening.
Yeah, please do.
And I'm talking a little bit behind the scenes with Gabriel about possibly taking more of a role in the, in their whole movement, because I really believe in what they're doing. Been an Anastasia fan for a long time. So I might take over some duties in that realm as well.
Maybe she'll benefit us with a bit of her
Oh,
presence.
she'll be here for the tour.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. That sounds like
I
We'll
look
have
forward to
forest
having,
nets while we're doing the tour.
I look forward to having our local squirrels feed me.
And yeah. And Mike, I'll be seeing you at Confluence down in Texas in Bandera, the 7th through the 12th. Anybody who wants to go and join us there live and in the flesh, that those tickets I think are still available. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And we're going to be doing a Music and Sky lounge there. And I really appreciate you guys helping out with that so we can have a space to have the Alfa Vedic Music and Sky folks have a nice decompression area where we can hang out, sort of be our spot. So that's fantastic. And I'm just really excited to, see you guys more in person. You guys are close enough. You can come to the farm, hang out here, hang out with Bear and Deb and our whole crew. And really that's, was trying to round this out with the idea of community, because oftentimes when we get so focused on law, we get so focused on the individual.
Yeah.
And really it's incumbent, and I was stressing this a bit in the chat today for those who are just waking up to this. Well, it's incumbent upon those who are already farther down the journey to share this with those who are just waking up to it, because it is custom. And Matt and I were trying to remember this maxim around custom. It supersedes something. I could not remember the maxim. I can't find it. But this idea of custom, right, is so important. And custom, all that is in the world that we live in, custom is based upon the consensus of the majority. And that's why you now go through I choose not to, because I have stood up to that custom, but the body scanners at the TSA right now, they're trying to enforce a new custom where they're going to have you, your retina scan, your face scan, when you're showing your ID, to get hurt, like before you get the body scanner. And they say specifically on the signs here in the airports, United States, that this is voluntary, because they haven't asserted the custom yet. So what's that mean? It means it's about the community of our brothers and sisters also waking up. It's not just an individual process here, right? So we need to, and Bear and I, especially during the COVIDiate times, I'll admit it, like we threw our hands up. We're like, there's only so many people we can help. Like, you're going to need to do the inner work, right? First and foremost. But then as you're on the path, we're here to also help in any way we can, as long as you're showing that will force to change. And that's what I love about the communities of Music and Sky and Alfa Vedic and everybody, is that we're coming together because we've chosen that new path.
Yep. Yeah. Tim Lovato once said to a friend of mine in a conversation we were in about a hard time, there's the path that you choose, there's the path that I choose, and there's the path that we choose together. And you need to have all of them. I need to know where I am. He needs to know where he is. And if we're going to do things well and clearly together, effectively, we need to know which path we are on together. Right? And we spend a lot of diligent time being clear about what that trajectory is, especially early on, so that we know we're aiming for the mark. And we're all aiming at the same mark, which is to have a fulfilling, loving, and creative life together. So let's move that along in a loving, clear, and focused manner together. Right? So all of you watching, listening, I want to express my deep and profound love, because you showed up to listen through this conversation. That means that you're on that path and you're on your way in coming to the community and adding that clarity of your own into this. And the more you generate that energy and that clarity within yourself, the better we all are. And the better off we're going to create for that seed that we're planting now, that becomes the tree, that becomes the fruit that our great, great, great grandchildren eat from. And that seed that they plant from that fruit, that becomes the next thing. Those are the natural processes of why this matters. And if you can find that why this matters, the purpose for this within what we've said, or within yourself, we're actually getting somewhere. We're moving something real back into the fore. And that's important.
And we're just a breath away from critical mass. And you can always tell critical mass happening, because that's when the predator class starts trying to pull out all stops. So you never know if you're going to be that one last little drop of love into the into the bank that's going to push the whole thing forward. So everything you're saying is spot on. Thank you so much, you guys, both of you, for what you're doing, and and I know we're going to have a lot of fun together in the future. And let's go with the Terra Preta, get together for sure. I'd really like to learn more from
Got
you
you.
guys. Yeah,
I got you. I'm looking
yeah,
forward to that as
awesome.
well. And lots of love, you guys. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you guys both through your output into the world and the good works that you're doing as far as, you know, from products to personability and to presentation, your keen eye to aesthetic, all the way through your whole presentment and paradigm. And also getting to know you on a personal level, sitting in quiet conversation. Bear, the first time we met, you sat down next to me and you said, don't worry about it. We've known each other forever. And it really, I feel that, brother. And Mike, likewise, been amazing getting to work with you and also get to know you on a personal level, playing some Dungeons and Dragons behind the scenes and all the things. So thanks so much for the time and the conversation and camaraderie. Appreciate it.
And we'll keep our community informed as soon as you've got things rolling on your end with the law course.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would love to talk about potentially offering it on our platform too to help you guys out, or doing
Excellent. Yeah.
something we're there. So to really
Oh,
support you guys on that,
yeah,
because I see it as a
yeah.
valid companion to I Am the Living Law workshop we did with Marsha Ann.
Yep. Thank you. And cool. We'll talk about that.
Beautiful, guys.
And,
Sweet.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, in the show notes below, you'll find the links for these two gentlemen, as well as the selfsown.life website. They'll have that the opportunity for you to sign up for that course live soon. On there, can they join a mailing list or anything? How can they be contacted so that they know when that goes live?
There is a mailing list link on the site in several places. It's easy to find. Sign up for that mailing list. We will be letting people know where it's at and when it's coming and how to get there. And, it's in the works. We're moving forward with it diligently and really excited about it. It's already, as it is, a profound body of work. It's been a great learning process for both of us, as well as a profound opportunity to bring something real into the world that's very needed. So I'm very excited about it. Doesn't do it justice, but it's the word that's coming to me. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Well, thank you two guys for living the way and being the way. We appreciate you so much and look forward to further conversations. Guys, go check out their links in the show notes. And remember to get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go plant something, go show Mother Nature some love. She'll show it right back. We've got a packed greenhouse. It's basically a nursery. Shannon's been crushing it, Bear. I'm excited to get out there and get planting. Spring is upon us, and let's
amazing.
let's
Our
crush it.
greenhouse is full of ashwagandha, ashwatthaba, and astragalus right now.
The triple A's. You're triple A.
Yep.
Certified.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, guys, love you. See you next time. Peace.
Cool.